Today, I'm sure some of you are aware from the people who have been around and about outside from the Union today. A lot of the posters have been up around the Union campus, University campus this week. Today is Charles Darwin's 199th birthday. Now, for those of you who don't know who Charles Darwin is, he was a naturalist in the 19th century. He was born in 1809 in Shropshire near Wales. And he's best known for his proposal and then study, his trip around the world into the theory of evolution, particularly by natural selection, which probably is more commonly known by most people as survival of the fittest, this idea that the fittest and strongest people are the ones that survive. Darwin hypothesised that species evolved because they competed better for natural resources and their rivals. So like the bugs that survive are the ones that could eat better and could breathe better in the atmosphere. He suggested that for any species to survive above another, they must adapt better to the habitat than the other species. More simply said, evolve and survive, don't and die. Now this theory is almost universally accepted amongst most academics and amongst the population at large. I mean, most people would say that evolution is the fact that we do come from, like, we have a shared common ancestry with apes, for example, or that it's difficult to know that rats 50 years ago were killed by warfarin, which is a rat poison and they're now not. Although it's really quite sort of accepted amongst most people, there are still criticisms of it. There are still people who disagree with it. And one of the biggest objections is the idea of altruism, which is basically, if it's best to compete with your neighbour, why be nice to them? Surely, with us sat here today, we're all aiming for, or most of them are aiming to get a degree. Now, surely it's better for me to get a degree and easier for me to get a degree if there's fewer people here. There's less competition for things like the library, for teacher time, for marking time, for feedback. So surely it's better for me, for all of you, not to be here. So why we're here as a community? Why is this society evolved? And that's really the sort of question that I want to sort of look at today. Why evolve such complex social structure? I mean, if you just look at society today, you can see how complex that is. If our best interest is served by competing with each other and competing for the resources around us. And so today's discussion is focused on the sort of question, is it survival of the fittest? Or is perhaps a better way of putting it, survival of the nicest? When Darwin published his Origin of Species, he failed to include any ideas on how his theory should be applied to society and how social order evolved. He attempted to rectify this in his second book, which is with a closer look at how man had evolved, called Descendants of Man, where he suggested the evolution of society was essential in creating the best possible environment for procreation. Basically, it meant we could get better mates, and therefore making procreation as efficient as possible. Now I'm going to sort of suggest sort of my addition to that. Most of this work is mine. It does pull on some of Darwin's ideas and some of a guy called Wallace's ideas, who was actually before Darwin, and he brought about this idea of social evolution. It's basically my opinion that society and the evolution of society is a necessary result of Darwin's work. That basically for humans to survive as a species, it's actually better for us to work together than compete with each other. Humans, for example, are not natural predators. In the wild, in the days of ancient man, one man would not have been very high up the pecking order for food. We're pretty much beaten by every other natural predator, particularly man's habitat at the time, which is Africa. And we're competing with some of the large cats, a lot of the larger herbivores would, be our enemies. Man has limited strength. For our size and our skeletal structure, we're actually relatively weak. We don't possess an ability to fight animals. We have really bad senses. We don't see well at night. We have really poor hearing. We have really poor sense of smell. An awful sense of taste compared to other animals. We can't tell poisons until we've ingested them. And so really, the only sort of redeeming feature of humanity is the fact we can talk to each other and form communication, and we have opposable thumbs, which means we have really good manual dexterity. We can fashion tools. So this led early man to sort of get the concept of a cooperative society. Basically, a really primitive idea of you watch my back, I'll watch yours. So when you're hunting, one person does the hunting, the other person makes sure there's nobody sneaking up behind you. And then, as sort of technology and society began to evolve and these small hunting groups became farming communities, the rules changed a little bit. It was no longer just a case of, well, while you're throwing your spear, I'll make sure no lion's behind you. It became, well, if I'm doing the farming, I haven't got time to make the farm tools. So I can either produce enough food for everybody on my own, with someone else making the tools, or we can all suffer by farming really small pieces of land with poor quality tools. So the conclusion from that, it's actually beneficial for us to work in small groups, particularly towards a shared common goal. Without a group's protection, an individual would sooner perish in the age of early man. Now this observation is still true today. We do not all possess the abilities and skills required to function as individuals. Not all of us are brilliant cooks. Not all of us, can hunt for prey. Not all of us can do manual labour. Not all of us have the skills beyond that to do computer work. We don't all have the skills to do design work. We don't all have the skills to be historians. And as our society stands today, those skills are all important. So it's still about sharing the skills. And obviously, the more complex societies get, the more complex the social structure has to become. And the key to developing the social structure, why this actually happens, lies in our ability to sacrifice some of our individual needs for the benefit of others. For example, I'm a computing student, I do a computing degree. Now I've sacrificed pursuing my interests in things like history, in things like literature, in things like art, to the same standard, so I can provide the services that I will provide after I graduate. And although this sort of seems a little bit contradictory in the idea that if I give up stuff about me, then we're all better off, where does this idea come from? And basically, it's the idea that if I give up something, so will you. I trust that if I give up my pursuit of literature, one of you will give up your pursuit to, say, your interest in computers, and pursue literature or pursue art, and therefore make up for that sacrifice that I've made. Now, the idea of survival of the fittest makes this all seem a little bit strange, especially it did to me at first when I first started reading about this, is that if really it's all about competing for the same resources, then surely if I give something up, you should take advantage of that. I'm making myself weaker. Surely if we're going to compete and succeed, then people should take advantage of me. But that's really sort of the crux of my argument we come to here, is that the idea of a social governance, this idea of a social contract, is that, as a general rule, because we know we must be a society in order to survive, we must have some system of rules, some social contract to bind into that, which means that without thinking about it, without being a conscious thought, we all, to demonstrate this idea of altruism, we all do give up something we want ourselves in order to benefit everyone totally. Things like, if we say we want the latest PlayStation, or we want the latest bike, we want the latest stereo or anything, we don't just walk into a shop and take it. And that is the idea of survival of the fittest, that if we want something and we need it and it's important to us, we should go and get it. We should adapt to our environment. If we need a stereo, we should have a stereo. But that doesn't happen. We wait, we save up money, we work towards something. We give up having it now in order to benefit society, to keep this social cohesion, to keep this idea of society together.